Hi, I'm Dr. Jason J. Campbell, and I want to thank you for taking the time to watch my videos. In this video, I'm going to be beginning a new series on international war and terrorism, and the approach throughout the lecture is going to come from Midlarski's book, The Handbook of War Studies 2. This is the 2000 edition. So the Handbook of War Studies 2 from Midlarski. And what I'm going to be doing is selecting a number, not all, a number of the essays incorporated within his edited work, and I'm going to do an analysis of the essays and the concepts presented by each of the authors. As I've done before in my previous video lectures, the notes that I have will be accessible to you. Just click the banner that will pop up or the button in the description. It'll take you to the PDF. As I continue through the analysis of international war and terrorism, the PDF will get longer, so continually check the PDF because it will be amended until I complete the lecture. With that being said, let's begin. So this is international war and terrorism. Alright, and this is section 1.1 in the notes. Alright, this particular section comes from Martha Crenshaw. So Martha Crenshaw is the author of this article, and all of this information is here. So Martha Crenshaw's article, Terrorism and International Violence, is going to be the focus of the analysis for section 1.1. So in this section we're going to be looking at some of the findings that Crenshaw has in Midlarski's edited work, and we're going to analyze the concepts as it pertains to international war and terrorism. So to begin then, the question is, what are some of the motivating factors for terrorism? And it's not in any sense to claim that these motivating factors are exhaustive, right? Crenshaw, myself, Midlarski aren't saying that there are three and only three motivating factors for terrorism, but these are generally considered to be some of the distinguishing features, some of the distinguishing motivating causes for terrorism, right? So motivation for terrorism. Okay, the first one is powerful states constitute attractive targets, right? A powerful state for a terrorist organization is an attractive target, right? So we'll say the bigger the state, the better the target. Right? The bigger the state is, the better the target for a terrorist organization. And the question is, why is it that powerful states constitute attractive targets? You can think of it like this, right? With respect to the relationship between the terrorist group, right, and the target, with respect to the relationship between the terrorist group and the target, the larger the state is, right, the larger the state is, if the terrorist group is able to attack successfully the state and gain international media attention by its attack, then the larger the scale of the attack on the state, so, right, the increase the scale of the attack on the state, the increase the attention given to the terrorist organization, right? So that there's a correlation between the target and the attention. So if we were to plot this, right, and we have size of state, S-T-A-T-E, and then we have attention to terrorist organization, then our chart looks like this, right? The larger the size of the state, the more the attention given to the terrorist organization. And the whole point, as we'll see later, is that terrorist organizations thrive on media coverage, right? It's sort of this catch-22. Not giving coverage to the terrorist attack fuels sort of ignorance, and global fear is hampered, however. But giving credence or giving media coverage to terrorist organization fuels them to do bigger and bigger scale attacks, right? The bigger the attack, as we've seen, the bigger the attack, the more attention they get, so that there's this correlation between an increase in the scale of the attack with respect to the size of the state, and an increase in the attention that the terrorist organization receives. So a very, very small organization can receive very, very large international attention if the scale and the target of the attack is very, very, very high. This was obviously the case in the attacks in Mumbai. The terrorist organization, relative to other organizations, was relatively small. However, the scale of the attack was large, and India is obviously a populous state. So thus it garners greater international attention. So that's the first thing, right? One of the motivating forces is that powerful states obviously are going to constitute attractive targets. Number two is that weaker states are easily infiltrated, right? So there is dual benefit to terrorist organizations. If the state's really, really large, then it garners greater attention. However, if the state is really, really small, it's easier to infiltrate, it's easier to attack, right? So weaker states, smaller states, are easier to attack. Right? Smaller states are easier to attack. The smaller the state is, obviously, the less appropriations, financial appropriations the state has with respect to a global scale, not with respect to the percentage within the state, for military defense. Since terrorist organizations are exceedingly becoming more and more organized, which we'll see in a little bit, attacking a small state is also an advantage to a terrorist organization. So whether or not the organization targets larger states or smaller states, there are advantages for the organization to attack either. In attacking a large state successfully with a large-scale attack, the organization garners greater international attention for themselves, obviously, which they use for bolstering recruiting. If the organization attacks a smaller state, it's advantageous because it's easier to infiltrate the state. And then number three, pre-existing sentiments towards non-cooperation exist within particular regions, right? So that within specific regions, there will be non-cooperation between interstate conflicting groups, right? Whether it's regionally conflicting groups, state versus regional groups, non-state groups versus non-state groups, interstate conflict becomes a huge contribution to the growing pervasiveness of terrorism, right? There are going to be interstate regional conflicts, whether it's religious or secular or land resource conflict, what have you, power conflict. That intrastate conflict can be used also as a recruitment tool for terrorist organizations. As a matter of fact, in a book that I've written already and it's already been submitted, it'll be out later this year. I spoke quite in depth about the relationship between intrastate conflict and international global terrorism. Right? There's a direct relationship between these. Right? So what ends up happening is that this non-cooperation between warring factions, right, intrastate warring factions, also contribute to the expansion of interstate conflict, right? So that we moved, in a sense, right? We have intrastate conflict, right? And then obviously this would be interstate, right? This would be, right, intrastate conflict can spill over to interstate conflict, right? So that warring factions here, faction A versus faction B, whoever they are, the intrastate conflict between faction A and B can spill over into another state, right? Right? State 1's faction A and B intrastate conflict can spill over into state 2, and now that intrastate conflict has become interstate conflict. With the ever-expanding interstate conflict, it's more and more likely that terrorist organizations will use this conflict between warring factions to elicit more and more members for their organization. So it's very important, if you think of it then, from sort of a peace-building conflict resolution standpoint, which is what I do, it's very, very important then to recognize that once once the violence is escalated to interstate conflict, it's going to be very, very hard to manage. It's easier to manage an intrastate conflict. So it's at this point, right? It's at the point of intrastate conflict that peacekeepers and conflict resolutionists, it's at this point, at intrastate conflict, that peacekeepers and conflict resolutionists best serve the global community in peacekeeping and peace building, right? Once it's escalated to interstate conflict, then it becomes far, far more complicated to pacify and resolve the conflict, because the conflict is in a sense very regimented.